Welcome to Muskoka Living, your guide to life and property in the heart of Ontario. I'm your host, Jeanette Inthisorn, a local real estate agent with eXp Realty here in beautiful Muskoka. Owning a home in Muskoka is more than just a transaction. It's a way of life. And this podcast is part of my commitment to help all homeowners in Muskoka. Through this show, I aim to provide valuable insights, tips, and advice on various aspects of living in this remarkable area, from maintaining your property to embracing the unique lifestyle that comes with it. So whether you're a long-term resident, a weekend cottager, or someone looking to make Muskoka their home, I invite you to join me on this journey in the most picturesque corner of Ontario. Today, I'm talking with Muskoka Lakes Fire Chief Ryan Murrell about safe practices for outdoor entertaining with campfires, bonfires, barbecuing, and fireworks. Hi, Ryan. Thank you for meeting with me.
Nice to meet you too, Jeanette.
So when you're moving into a new place up here, what are the regulations with having fire pits?
In the township of Muskoka Lakes, we have what we call the open air burning bylaw, and it really regulates two sizes of fires. Typically, a campfire is a small fire, and by small we mean anything under 3 foot by 3 foot or 1 meter by 1 meter is a campfire. And what we ask for in the bylaw is that you always attend all open air burning, so that's something we want to look for. You can only burn the small fire without a permit. You don't need a permit, is what I'm trying to say. You can do that 2 hours before sunset, up to 2 hours before sunrise. After that, if you're burning during the day, then you do need a permit, and it changes into that other fire size, which is the larger one. And people require a permit at that point, and they get that so they can burn their brush and things around the house. Some safety things that I would mention about your campfire: no fires are permitted when the wind is in excess of 16 kilometers an hour. And we always check that with Environment Canada. And like I said before, the biggest problems that we find with campfires are people aren't attending them when we show up. Often they're not burning the right thing. We want you only to burn clean, dry wood and have some method of extinguishment. So that would be something like a bucket of water or hose or something nearby so you can put it out.
And how do you know when it's fully out?
Good question. So what we recommend is that you take a bucket of water, fill it up like basically a 20 liter or 5 gallon pail. Spill it onto the fire. If it's a small fire, like a 3x3, you'll find that it gets kind of murky, looks like mud, and we want you to actually stir it up. And you'll hear a lot of hissing, especially if there's rocks in the fire. But we want you to do that until it's cool to the touch. That will indicate that basically you have a fire that should be out. You should, for best practice, it's a good idea to have a hose nearby and to hose down all the vegetation all the way around. Because as we all know, we all love campfires. They have like beautiful little embers, little fireflies that fly off, and sometimes they can land in the greenery and create new problems.
And so if someone were to take a sage bunch or a lavender bunch and throw it down into the campfire for mosquitoes, is that allowed? Oh
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's natural vegetation. That's a great question though. The things we don't want to find in a fire if we roll up on somebody's property and we've been called to go there. Typically, we get called to go to properties when the smoke is very black and acrid. And then what we find is that somebody's burning something that possibly will be hazardous to their own health. Obviously, you don't want to burn garbage. If we find garbage waste in there, we can apply a charge. Oftentimes, we'll put it out and we'll educate the people that are involved. And, it's our role to try to ensure that we're not creating any kind of new environmental problem with allowing people to burn in their campfires.
And you mentioned dry wood. How do we know if it's dry? So say I cut down a tree and I wanted to split that and burn it. How would I know that it's dry enough to use in the fire?
It depends on how long you keep it out and you keep it elevated in the air. Typically, we find with most people, they'll cut down a tree and then they'll wait almost half a year before they burn it. And that's because when it's wetter, it will create more smoke and it won't be as efficient a burn. So you actually won't get as much heat out of it. You are better to try to buy wood that's already pre-made, like firewood, or split your wood early and then let it sit out near the fire so that it can actually dry out. But in that regard, you don't want to have too many things that are within that 4.5 meter area. So basically the 10-foot area close to the fire. That way the fire can't spread into those things. So you want to keep that pile of wood that you are going to burn a little bit further away from the fire.
And then how far does a fire have to be away from things like your house? Or I know a lot of people up here have propane tanks.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the rules state that everything has to be at least 10 meters, sometimes 15 meters, depending on the size of your fire. So 10 meters, you're looking at, 20, 30 feet away from a fence, a structure, a vehicle, anything that can burn. We we have a lot of grace when it comes to that, but typically we always look for things like overhanging vegetation as being a problem.
Right.
Like, so a lot of people put a fire and then they'll have an overhanging tree and they won't notice that, oh my goodness, the tree is actually singeing and burning. That's something that you do want to pay attention to. Again, we're all about education when we show up at places, but for safety's sake, we do want you to have that good 15 meter, 50-foot distance from a structure. That's always the best. If you've got 50 feet between whatever you're burning and the house, then that's a good place to be. One thing we have noticed that's happened by accident is that if you go to Home Hardware and Canadian Tire, you'll find that people buy those beautiful things that go on top of decks.
Yes.
I highly recommend that you do not burn on a deck. I know some of those appliances indicate that it's okay to do that if you put down a mat. I really would not. I'm not comfortable with burning on a deck.
Right.
If it was a propane appliance with a dial, that is something that we'd be willing to look at in terms of safety, because it probably indicates in the manufacturer's instructions that it's okay to do. But if it doesn't indicate in the manufacturer's instructions it's okay to do, don't do it. And I wouldn't recommend putting any kind of a fire on a deck.
Okay. A stone patio would be okay. It's just the wood decks.
Yeah.
And is there any kind of baffle that would be appropriate for underneath it if you were doing a permanent installation on your wood deck? So is there like a firestone or something underneath? Yeah,
so if you have a low wood deck, let's say it's less than 2 feet, and you're going to be that 50-foot distance from the house, that's quite a big deck. So if you do have that set up, then perhaps you can they make a special kind of fire mat that will control that. I would say in those instances, if that is going to be your setup, that you want to make sure that you're always supervising that fire. That's something that we're definitely going to look for. And we say supervision, we mean somebody over the age of 18 that's always within 10 foot of the fire watching it.
Right, that would be quite a bit back. So you'd have to have a very large deck to do that.
Yeah, you would. And that would be, that's the trick with it. It's always about that, we call that distance from the one obstruction to the next, because we don't want to create a ladder. So think of a ladder not upwards, but a ladder sideways.
Right.
A fuel ladder that allows you to get to the bigger thing that's going to burn.
Okay. And so when we're constructing a fire pit, is it okay to just make sure that the area is gravel and burn directly on top of the gravel, or do you want to see stones surrounding it to act as a wind baffle? What are you looking for?
Basically, when you build the fire, you want to always dig down to what we call bare mineral soil. So you want to make sure that that part is definitely the place where the fire is happening. And then ringing around the fire, a lot of people use stone, and then outside of that, they'll use patio stone or gravel. It's probably best to try to build everything around the fire as a non-combustible item. You actually have to, as per the bylaw, up to 4.5 meters away from the center line of the fire.
Okay.
A fire can't go any higher than 1 meter high and 1 meter in diameter. And then basically as you build out from there, you want to be thoughtful to egress paths. If something goes wrong, if somebody throws something they shouldn't throw on the fire. As always, we always recommend if there's pets or children nearby, that person that's supervising the fire is always cautious about what's happening around that fire. I've actually had an occasion where we were having a campfire and we had a young family member that ran into the fire and fell.
Oh no.
And I was so thankful that I knew what to do with the burn. That's something to refresh as well. That person that's supervising the fire should be sober and should be able to handle anybody that gets into a burn situation. As always, if your clothing catches fire, stop, drop, and roll, and make sure you get that medical assistance, especially for a burn. A burn can definitely turn on you, and it's something you have to cool pretty quickly.
Yes. And when you're referring to the height of the fire, is that referring to the height of the wood pile or the actual height of the flames?
That's a great question. Basically, what we look for is we look to make sure that the fire that you have can be contained. So that 1 meter diameter really is important. It's hard to control the height of a fire because the kind of material that you're burning could be such that the flame height does go higher than a meter, but we do try to look for that 1 meter height. Obviously, what will happen is the general public has access to the same rules that you do, and when they see a flame that's over 1 meter high, they're going to call it in.
Right.
And then we're going to come by and you're going to have some new visitors at your fire. And maybe you're right within bounds, but oftentimes it's not very fun for people to have the fire department show up at their place. So if you can keep that 1 meter height, it's pretty easy to do. Typically you got a few logs on the fire. That's more than enough. It's more than enough to give people that ambience of what they're looking for a campfire.
Dakota fire pits.
Ooh.
Are we allowed to do those? and it's a way of suppressing the smoke. So you have the fire, and then you have another hole over here, and you kind of create an updraft, and you feed the fire from the hole.
Oh, cool.
And so it creates less smoke.
Any
and
outdoor
less
burning
sparks.
would have the same kind of application as our outdoor burning bylaw would apply. Anytime you have an open flame that's not controlled by a valve, then it's going to have the same application. So as long as you're meeting what we call those setbacks from things, and you've built in that safety and somebody supervising it at all times, I can't see there being a lot of extra safety precautions.
Okay. And so if the main part of the Dakota fire pit was the 3 feet and then the ancillary hole was off, that would still be...
Yeah, probably more than adequate. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, because the flame has a harder time exiting the ground into something. But
Yes.
It's a good question because a lot of wildfires actually occur in later in the season, and then they run into the roots of trees, and then they follow those roots, and then they pop back up when spring pops up again. So that is a thing now, and that's why you're seeing a lot of fires in BC and Alberta that continue over the winter, because they've actually been burning in the ground throughout the winter season.
Okay, and is it... I wonder if it's the roots or if it's the mycelium.
It could be. I've heard all kinds of things. I've heard things that there's a major concern about certain kinds of moss that are in the ground that are, they have a lot of carbon built into them. And that is a big worry, actually, for the smoke load that's coming out of these wildfires as we move forward.
Right. And what are the rules around putting a grill on top of it and grilling?
Really, there's no rules around that, other than you've still got the main rules around just a regular campfire. Obviously, if you're going to put something on top of the fire, you want to make sure you have the proper reaching tools, and that you're aware of what you're putting on the fire might cause new burns. So I can think of instances where people I know had those cheesy Oktoberfest sausages,
right?
And they didn't give any thought to how hot that item would be when they go grab it with the tongs. Just, have some thought about what you're doing. Often we see a lot of marshmallows that fall into the fire. Don't, ensure that everybody that's doing that understands not to reach into the fire. Again, going back to the burns, and when they do pull something out of the fire, that they blow it off.
Right. I can imagine chocolate as well on the s'mores.
Exactly. It's always that first night camping that everybody gets burned really badly with the s'mores and whatnot, and then they learn a lesson. But, if you can plan a little bit with those people and just give them a few safety tips. Obviously, if you have poker items that you're going to be putting in the fire, make sure that those are kept away from children so that people aren't running around getting into the fire.
What I heard was this is a great excuse to buy extra marshmallows and just say it's a fire safety reason.
Yes, exactly. Great.
So when you're barbecuing, what are some of the safety precautions that we should be taking?
Barbecuing in general, it actually has been a cause of concern here in Muskoka Lakes. So Muskoka Lakes has actually seen a fair amount of house fires that have come from barbecues.
Okay.
So barbecuing the stats that we have are North American wide. Typically in the United States throughout the summer season, we see over 30 fires a day due to grills. So they call them grills, barbecues, same thing. In that environment, what typically causes a fire is because of an unattended consequence. So a lot of times people are not attending the barbecue.
Right.
And they've walked away for a few seconds. A lot of people have cell phones. They walk away for a few seconds. I'm guilty of this. I've done this myself.
I do that. I forget the sauce inside, and I'll go run inside quickly to go get the sauce.
Right. And between that's a number one cause of fire is the unattended piece. And then second to that is where the barbecue was situated.
Right.
So oftentimes people put a barbecue too close to an eave, an awning, even the side of the building. They open the barbecue and it creates new problems on the siding or into the house. That's how we've seen a lot of structure fires here in Muskoka Lakes, was that the barbecue was too close to the house.
So how far should it be?
Well, it actually does indicate in your manufacturer's instructions.
Which I should totally read now.
Yeah, but I'm not going to just throw it away like that's the only answer. Typically, you want to keep it at least a meter away from your house.
Right.
And a good, like when you open the lid, that's where you start to figure out the distance. Open the lid and then another 2 feet to the railing.
Okay.
Oftentimes people don't have decks big enough for barbecues, so I don't often suggest that you put your barbecue on a deck.
Right.
But if you are doing that, you might want to be very cautious about what that looks and feels like. And one way you can prevent a fire is having a full understanding of how clean your barbecue is. A lot of people will pull it out beginning of the season and they'll light it up and that's how they'll clean it. They'll say, "Oh, burning everything off."
Yeah.
The problem with that approach is you need to look at all the components to the barbecue. Often barbecues are made with very thin metals, and they are susceptible to rot, especially if it's been kept in like a garage and it's kind of wet or dank. You want to take a look at the hoses, maybe get a soapy solution, put it all around the hose, and check to see if there's any kind of leakage on any of the flow.
Right.
And then really clean out all those grease trays and all that fat deposits, all the things that have burned up before you've lit it up, because that's a better way to go about it rather than having a big hot device that we're going to have to call, have a whole bunch of new guests at your barbecue.
Yes, and also you have a propane tank directly underneath you, and you definitely don't want anything happening to that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I can think of an instance last summer where we attended a place and they knew everything that they had done, what went wrong. The barbecue was just too close. They got really fortunate that the way that the dad handled it is he closed the barbecue, which is the first step. You should always close the barbecue that's on fire. And then he turned off the propane valve. He went and got a garden hose and then tried to suppress it. And he still called the fire department, which was a good move. Because when we got there, we were able to check the siding and ensure that the fire was actually out. So it's absolutely okay to call us, because then you get all that peace of mind that we've actually made it safe for you.
For sure. Hey friends, I have a small favor to ask. If you find this podcast valuable, insightful, or just plain interesting, I kindly ask that you share this with 3 people who might benefit from it. By spreading the word and helping this podcast grow, we can reach even more homeowners and build an incredible resource for everyone in the Muskoka community. When it comes to fireworks, because we're coming up on Canada Day in about a month, if you're looking to put on a fireworks display in your backyard, what should we be looking for?
Yeah, interestingly, last year, the township changed the fireworks bylaw, and I think for the better. Fireworks are a cause of a lot of injuries in the United States. The United States does a better job of tracking injuries, burn injuries, as it relates to fireworks. The average every year is about 9,000 to 10,000 injuries on fireworks. Half of those injuries actually occur because of sparklers and kids under the age of 15. Right. So I would highly suggest people don't buy sparklers. Getting back to just basic consumer fireworks, the rules in the township of Muskoka Lakes, it's allowed 3 times of the year. So Victoria Day, Canada Day, and New Year's Eve.
Oh, okay.
And what happens in each of those cases, each one has a separate scenario. So Victoria Day, it's the entire weekend. So it's the Victoria Day holiday, which is usually the Monday. And then you also have the Saturday and the Sunday where you can launch fireworks. And in that occasion, you're only allowed to launch the fireworks, consumer fireworks, up to 11 o'clock at night and then no later. Canada Day, it's very similar. If the Canada Day falls on the Thursday or the Friday, then you can also launch on the, so it has to fall on either the Thursday or the Friday. You can launch on the following Saturday and Sunday. If it falls on the first Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, you launch on the earlier Saturday and Sunday as well. Okay. So you basically have like a little bit of leeway in case the weather gets bad. But again, those fireworks have to end at 11 p.m. And then New Year's, because obviously people launch at midnight, we extend that timeline to about 12:30 in the morning. Okay. So those are the new rules around fireworks. If I had my druthers, I know, and you'll actually see it on our signs on the way in. You'll see a lot of fireworks ban sign. That's what that's for. So we tell people basically fireworks are banned all the time in the township except for those 3 occasions. Okay. And speaking of those signs, what do the various colors mean when we're driving by? Great question. I'm not just saying that's a great question. Lately, that's come up quite a bit. The Ontario government, a long time ago, decided to follow what we call the fire danger rating, the International Fire Danger Rating, which was set out by Smokey the Bear. So Smokey the Bear in the United States was pretty much the U.S. wildfires mascot for how we control wildfires. And in Canada here, we adopted the same mascot in Ontario. The MNR uses that mascot. You might see Smokey at lots of events. I have his hat. There you go. And along that came with that was this cool grid that was very easy for the public to understand. Low, moderate, high, and extreme. And in some cases, you'll see places call it low, moderate, high, very high, and extreme. But typically the 4 colors are what you're looking for. Right now we're sitting in moderate. I could actually think that maybe at the end of this week, we might be even climbing into high. As those colors elevate, it's an indicator to the public that it's time to take more caution with your outdoor burning. And some of them have different things that mean things. So for example, when you get into high, here in Muskoka Lakes, there's no fireworks at all allowed. Okay. So if it's Canada Day weekend and you see that it's high, no fireworks? No fireworks at all. And that's exactly what happened just this past Victoria Day weekend. We were in high, so there was no fireworks allowed. And that's because we're trying to prevent a fire or a wildfire from occurring, especially with this dense, all these structures that are in the bush. Right. It's because the bush isn't green up enough to actually suppress any kind of a firework that might land in the trees. And for those that don't understand this, the science behind this is even a sparkler, even a simple sparkler, at the tip of the sparkler is heated up to 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's quite hot.
Wow.
And that's pretty hot. Like if you were to put that on something plastic, you would actually see it melt into the plastic. So something to consider is that, fireworks might look pretty easy and they might go out to the naked eye, but the phosphorus that's in them actually burns in the trees. So that's the danger that we have with fireworks.
Okay.
On top of that, we have the environmental impact, which a lot of people complain that their animals are quite scared of the thundering sounds that fireworks bring. If we can recommend anything to people, it's try to attend a professional display. We call them display fireworks. It's actually the term for them. It's a commercial show. So typically those commercial operators, they don't have to apply that same bylaw that we talked about earlier because they pulled a separate permit.
And they have a pyrotechnic license, right?
That is exactly right. They have a pyrotechnic license, and that's kind of key because they've thought about where the shells are going to go, the safe distances. They've notified the fire department. We've checked the areas that they're dealing with. They're very well aware of their responsibility. And when I say responsibility, it's a word that has a lot of application in law.
Right.
They know that if something goes wrong, that they're on the hook, and they don't want to lose their license, right?
For sure.
So we work with them pretty heavily in Muskoka Lakes for weddings and large events. I could think at Walker's Point Marina, they do a big event every year where they launch a lot of fireworks into the air, and it's quite a spectacle. I know in Bracebridge, they launch a lot of fireworks, and it's really great to see. Those are professionals doing that, and those are the kinds of shows that we would encourage people to attend.
Okay. If you're looking for those shows, where would we find them? Just online or?
Yeah, I would search fireworks in Muskoka and just look for shows. I believe Huntsville has a show as well. I do know that Walker's Point usually has a Canada Day fireworks show, which is pretty cool. And especially if you have a boat, apparently it's quite the scene from our boat. You'll bump into our boats out there, and the OPP vessels are out there, so to kind of make it safe for everyone. I've had occasion in another market where I worked where we did fireworks, and we launched them from a boat, from a floating vessel. That takes some doing because the waves create new problems, and when the weather gets rough, it really gets rough quickly, and it cancels fireworks pretty quick.
For sure.
I would recommend that people go and watch one of those professional displays because the people involved in them often time it to music, and it's better environment for kids. There's a lot of safety built into the environment.
Awesome. And if you guys know of any, leave them in the comments below.
Barbecues.
Oh, one question I have. What's the difference between a campfire and a bonfire?
Yeah, so a bigger fire or a larger fire, the rules around a larger fire are a little different. So like I said before, you've got a bylaw that regulates both a campfire, and then that same bylaw regulates open air burning. You can have an open air fire. You need to get a permit for that because it's a larger size fire. An open air fire is something around the 2 meter by 3 meter. You need more than 15 meters to your closest obstacle. So you need, on average, you're looking at about a 30-meter distance from structures and other things, and you can burn brush. It's primarily for brush burning, but you will find that people use them as big bonfires. It's just really important that you have a permit because that permit is trackable. And we also know when you got a permit that you've read all the rules about wind, the rules about setbacks. You have all the methods of extinguishment. All the people that are attending the fire understand all the components to the fire. And then you only have one fire on your property. That's the big difference between a bonfire and a campfire. Okay.
And with the bonfires, what's the permit process?
So yeah, great question. On our website, you click on burnpermit.com. Right on our website, it takes you through an application. About a day later, somebody from our office will notify you it's time to pay. Your permit's been approved, especially if you're in one of the zones that's approved. Basically, what we do is we look at your property and see if there's actually the room to place that kind of fire. And then we approve a permit, and then we notify you that your permit's ready to pick up. You pay online, or you can pay by coming into the township office by cash, and then we'll accept the money and then issue your permit. It's a digital permit, and we do ask that, because it's a digital permit, you do have the ability to toggle on when you're burning and toggle it off. And by doing that, you'll let our fire department know when you're burning. So that if somebody sees a burn, like we had one today, somebody called in a bunch of smoke occurring on one of the points. So we said, oh, was somebody burning out there? Yep, we could see there's an active fire. So we send one person out to go check out what's going on rather than a fleet of vehicles thinking it's a house on fire.
Oh, that is super convenient.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into Muskoka Living, your guide to life and property in the heart of Ontario. I'm Jeanette Inthisorn, and you can find me on social media at Jeanette Sells Muskoka. 1 N, 2 T's. Remember to share this podcast with 3 friends, and let's spread the Muskoka magic far and wide.